Hi everyone, my name is Jean, and I'd like to personally welcome you to Culture Colosseum, the diverse and exciting channel focused on shifting the way you view and see the world. Today we are continuing the Untold series, which is where we dive into history of things that we never learned about in history class. Unfair, because all the people I talk about are so cool. Today we're talking about American history, and honestly one of the figures who I think deserves so much more praise than she ever got. Famous pilot Bessie Coleman. Today we are joined by Antoine. Hi.
Hey guys, what's up? Antoine here. It's going to be very fun to be with you today, Gene. And one of your very impressive videos, guys. Definitely watch the other videos in this series.
Oh,
And we have a lot of great things to come, especially today.
I'm so flattered. Now, I know I didn't learn about Bessie Coleman in school. Did you?
No, I never even heard the name until you really told me about it. So I think this is going to be a very interesting video.
Please make sure that you follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook in order to receive updates on content that's going to be coming out. You can interact with us here in the comments or on our Instagram page at Creator Source Studios and at Culture Colosseum. So let's jump into history. In order to understand who Bessie Coleman was and why she is such an important historical figure, we have to kind of understand what the US was like in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. What do you know that was going on in the 1890s and early 1900s in the US?
There was a lot of different things from the aftermath of the Civil War, where, slaves were finally free at that point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And they were trying to basically transition into the American, like the fabric of America, and try to build something for themselves now as free citizens, and have to see how that looks. And then that's when we get into more of how we got into segregation, Jim Crow laws.
Right.
We got into everything along that spectrum, leading into the Civil Rights Movement and then the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Yes, that's 100% true. We saw in the late 1860s and 1870s that African Americans in the US had gained their freedom. They were thriving at first. There was a dramatic political and economic shift in their direction where people were making colleges and voting and gaining land and honestly getting elected into local offices, which was amazing. And then the 1890s really hit, and we saw Jim Crow laws, which created mass disenfranchisement and targeted lynching. It was just not a good time for a lot of people. So even though it was an industrial and productive economy at this time, it had horrifying racism all over the US, just everywhere. She was born in Atlanta, Texas on January 26, 1892. So this is right when things are, with the Jim Crow laws, are really taking massive effect. We're seeing a lot of horror there. She was one of 12 kids, and her mother, Suzanne Coleman, was an African-American maid. She was doing decent in Texas. She really liked it there. All her family was there. Her father was a Native American sharecropper named George Coleman. Around 1901, her father moved to Oklahoma because the racism in Texas was getting so rampant and horrible that he just didn't feel like it was safe for him or his family really to be there anymore. But her mother decided to stay behind, and they settled in Waxahachie. She ended up kind of working on farmlands. Her and her mother would go and pick cotton, do extra laundry. She would go with her mother to clean people's houses and things, and that's kind of how they helped their whole family run. And her brothers got to move away and go and explore and join the military and do all that. But she decided she wanted to go to college. She wasn't 100% sure what she wanted to do yet, but she was figuring it out. That's what people do. So she got enough money, she saved up, and went to Langston University, which back then was the Colored Agriculture and Normal University. Weird name, but now it's Langston. So if people are interested, it's in Langston, Oklahoma, and she decided to go. But she could only afford one semester, and after that, she decided to just go back to work. At 23, she went to live in Chicago with her brothers and actually attended Burnham School of Beauty Culture in 1915. She became a manicurist, and she was honestly doing great. She met this man named Robert Abbott, who was the publisher of the Chicago Defender, and kind of became friends with him, and he really boosted media for her later on. So, We know that she became a pilot. How did she go from manicurist to pilot? What do you think was the dramatic change there?
I think it was probably her seeing something more into what she could be doing and wanted to go against what everyone thought that she was be capable of and things like that. She wanted to just go her own way, and she probably felt that's what her destiny was, and that's where she was heading towards.
Yeah, I mean, her brothers both were, two of her brothers were in the military, and she lived with them. So when they came back, they were just endlessly teasing her about how many more rights women had all over the rest of the world, especially in France. So they were really pestering her, and she is a stubborn, driven individual who really just said, you know what, you don't think I can do this? America doesn't think I can do this? I'll show them. So she went from manicurist to applying to flight school. However, in the US, flight schools wouldn't take her because not only was she Black and Native, but she was also a woman. So we don't want her here. But she wasn't determined not to give up. So she applied to schools in France and got in. And on June 15th, 1921, she ended up getting her international pilot's license at the Caudron Brothers School of Aviation in Le Courtois, France. She was like so proud of herself, and her family was shocked that she managed to do this. And when she got back to the US, so was everybody else. And we can see this is where Robert Abbott really comes into play. He built up media around her, and when she landed off that flight, walked into American soil, every single person from all these different media sources were coming to try and interview her and figure out, who is this woman who's just defined all of our horrible racism and sexism? With all the press coverage, she realized that she could make some more money off this and eventually get her own plane. So she decided to start touring around the US, giving speeches around schools and other institutions to try and encourage people and tell her story. So she was very adamant, though. She would not speak at any place that had segregation. That was no. So it was really interesting to see how many people bent over backwards to get her at their institutions, because they were willing to do something that they weren't willing to do for a lot of people, and desegregate for her speeches. So her flying career, that's the main chunk of what I want to get into, because this was her passion. This is what she loved. On September 3rd, 1922, she performed her first public flight by an African-American woman in the entire United States. This was the first one. People came from all over to see it. It was on Curtis Field near New York, and she borrowed a plane from Glenn Curtis, the guy who owned the field. She just borrowed his plane and flew around, which was amazing. And she got so much attention, and people were paying to go and see her do this. But you know, a lot of the flights at this time, it was very like military training for flying. She had a very different method of going about things. She had a very special type of flying. And I mean, what do you think people wanted to see from her? What do you think she was doing?
Probably she was doing maybe like some of the tricks, you know, making like little like the little cloud and like messages and stuff like that with her airplanes and stuff.
Pretty much. She wanted to be fancy with it. She wanted to show people that she was fearless and could do anything. So she did loops, which were extremely dangerous at that time because there was no roof to the plane. It was just empty space. So she was doing loops, making figure eights, doing all these tricks in the sky, and people ate it up. She was an icon. So she toured around performing, giving lessons, encouraging other African American and Native women to learn to fly. She thought that it was incredibly important that people break stereotypes. And I mean, people did. They followed in her footsteps. But in February of 1932, her engine of the plane that she was flying stopped and she crashed. She broke her leg, her ribs. She had cuts and bruises all over her body. And people were like, oh my gosh, is she going to stop flying? This is horrible. She got so injured. But she was back to flying sooner than people thought. She was again performing stunts and touring all over by 1925. So crashing didn't scare her. She was ready to perform and to do what she could. Her performances earned her enough money that she was able to buy her own plane, which was her dream. She got a Jenny JN4 with an OX5 engine. Don't know what that means, but it sounds really cool. She eventually returned back to her hometown in Texas to perform, and all the directors were like, hey, we know that you don't like a lot of racism, but can we still segregate the entrances to the performance? Like, people can sit where they want, but like, what if we just segregated the entrances? And she was like, why would you do that? That seems like a huge waste of expense. And they were like, okay, how about we don't segregate the entrances and we, like, people can sit, you know, one side or the other side. And she was like, don't segregate the entrances, and that's the only way I'll perform. So they didn't. And instead, it was kind of like a huge deal because the whole town was like, oh, what do you mean we have to walk in the same gate? Which is crazy to think about, but now, like, even now, there are still people who think like that. So she was able to perform, but she really stuck adamant to her rules. She was like, this is ridiculous. I'm not letting you guys be so prejudiced against something that's this pointless. And that was one of the main points of her career, is that people look up to her because she fought against that her entire time being a pilot and her entire time living, really. But I digress. Her death, an extremely tragic thing that we have to talk about. She died very young. On April 30th, 1926, she took a test flight with a friend of hers named William Wills. He was a mechanic, and he was testing out this plane that he was working on. And he was the one flying, actually. And there was a technical error, which caused a loose wrench to come undone, get stuck in the engine while they were 3,000 feet in the air, and it destroyed the engine. Wills lost control of the flight. The plane flipped midair, and neither of them were wearing a seatbelt, so Bessie fell out. And Wills was gripping onto the steering wheel and crashed the plane. Both of them died, and it shocked the entire nation. People couldn't believe that this woman who survived so many stunts and other crashes lost her life in such a horrible way. She had funerals kind of pop up all over the country, and the one in Chicago was actually run by Ida B. Wells Bennett. And her grave is still visited today. People will come and put flowers on it. It was honestly so tragic, but so much good came out of her life. Like, she was the very first civilian licensed Native American and African American woman pilot in the world. And in 1931, only like 5 years after her death, the Challenger Pilots Association of Chicago started a tradition of flying over her grave every year, which is still done. In 1977, the African American female pilots formed the Bessie Coleman Aviators Club, which is still in operations. It's like this really beautiful way for African American women to come together under this love of flying and this respect for this woman who really paved the way for a lot of people. So now we kind of know the story of Bessie Coleman. I think that she's this amazing figure who really did so much for people's rights in this country, and she just is an icon, and it's a shame that people don't talk about her. It's a shame we didn't learn about her. So now we know some about her.
Yeah, now we know a lot about her, and now we know her impact onto the world as an African American woman and as, you know, just an innovator in her field.
Yes, she every wall that came up, she moved around. Every time somebody told her, you can't do that, or no, you're not allowed, she stepped over it and did it anyway. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button and comment down below to tell me what stories you want to hear next, or if there's any other interesting fact you know about Bessie Coleman that I missed in this video. Also, comment down below or on our Instagram page to answer the question of the day, which is, if you could teleport to any one destination endless times, which destination would you choose? I hope to see you next time. I hope you enjoyed Untold. I'm Jean. Again, this is our CEO, Antoine. And welcome to Culture Colosseum.
Thank you guys. Have a good day.